this past weekend, a lot of fights were announced for the Ultimate Fighting Championship, but starting first with the biggest announcements that came the way for the UFC, that being UFC 202, which will be happening in Las Vegas, August 20th on pay-per-view. Of course, many fans already know the main event, Nate Diaz against Conor McGregor, once again in the welterweight division. Also now added to the card, it looks like it will be the co-main event of the evening. Anthony Rumble Johnson will face Glover Teixeira. As fans may know, this fight was moved off of UFC on Fox in July, which was slated for the co-main event there in Chicago to Holly Holm against Shevchenko. Rumble Johnson had to pull from that fight. It looks as though Alexander Gustafsson was rumored to take the spot of Johnson. However, that didn't materialize. They pulled Glover off the card, but the fight is still able to happen here at UFC 202, which, in my opinion, and probably a lot of other people's, will serve as a #1 contender fight, with the winner likely facing the winner of John Jones against Daniel Cormier, which of course will be the main event of UFC 200. Also added to UFC 202, huge bout in the welterweight division, which also could serve as a #1 contender for that division, as Damian Maia takes on Carlos Condit. That's going to be an excellent fight with the way Condit fights, with his style, a constant finisher, keeps coming forward, a lot of output, never makes you rest, of course, against the jiu-jitsu wizard that is Damian Maia. Also in the welterweight division, fresh off his victory over Patrick Cote, not one to rest on his laurels, that being the Cowboy Donald Cerrone. He's getting right back in there, and he's going to face the tough, very tough Rick Story, who is coming off a victory of his own not too long ago, as well as Rick Story was able to beat Tariq Saffiedine not too long ago. So that should be a pivotal bout in the welterweight division as well. Sticking with the welterweights, Hungil Lim will return as he takes on Sultan Aliyev, and that will also be at the 202 card. And boy, the welterweights continue here at 202 as Neil Magny will take on Deung Hun Kim. This is an excellent matchup, a matchup I've actually wanted for a while, and this is a really nice test for Neil Magny. He came back from adversity, was able to defeat Hector Lombard. Now he's taking on a guy that is probably just as big as him, just as strong as him, and has a great judo background. And really, in the last couple of fights, he's shown ability to kind of throw also with some reckless abandon, and does have some knockout power. So this should be a very interesting fight, and another, again, pivotal bout here in the welterweight division. Some other news and notes for the UFC. The UFC will be going to Salt Lake City, Utah, I believe for the first time, if not the first time in a very long time. And they have set their main event in the featherweight division. Fresh off his short notice victory over Cole Miller at UFC 199, the man known as Bruce Leroy, aka Alex Caceres, he will be in the main event against rising featherweight phenom Yair El Pantera Rodriguez. Interesting main event to say the least, but I think it should be a good one. You got Bruce Leroy, who's been around for quite a few years now. People like him. He's got the hair. He's got good striking, tricky submission game, and Rodriguez, since being featured on The Ultimate Fighter Latin America, has really been on a roll, and is definitely one of the bright stars in this stacked featherweight division. So maybe a little too soon for either guy to be in the main event, but I am intrigued. I think it's a good fight, though, regardless of its placement on a card. Also on the card will be Cub Swanson will be taking on Tezuka Kawajiri, speaking of the featherweight division. Also, hometown guy Cord McGee will be taking on Dominic Steele in the welterweight division. Also, friend of the show, and we hope to have him back on to talk about this fight, Zach Cummings will be taking on Santiago Ponzinibbio on that card. And also a big matchup in the middleweight division as Chris Camuzzi takes on Talas Leites. And also, sticking with the featherweight heavy card, Dennis the Menace Bermudez, speaking of Kawajiri, he just defeated Kawajiri back in February. He will be taking on former Ultimate Fighter Brazil winner Hani Jason. Some other news and notes for the UFC. The fight night scheduled for South Dakota for the UFC's first trip to that state will no longer be main evented by Tony Ferguson against Michael Chiesa. Ferguson, however, will stay on the card as he will take on short notice replacement Landon Venata, who trains out of the Jackson Winklejohn gym. His fight will be moved to the co-main event, so Ferguson stays on the card, gets a fight, and the new main event will now be a top 10 bantamweight matchup as former friend of the show Michael Mayday McDonald will take on John Lineker. So that is a huge matchup in the bantamweight division, and congrats to Michael on the main event spot. Also on the card, if you didn't hear already, our good friend Luis Smolka will be taking on Ben Nguyen in a matchup of two top 15 flyweights. Also, Tim Bosch will take on Josh Salmon. Ryan Hall will return against friend of the show Alex White. And also friend of the show Courtney Casey will take on Christina Stanciu. Just looking over that card. So those are the changes to that card. Also, I'm actually excited for this. Cody Pfister against Scott Holtzman in the lightweight division. Should also be a pretty good, entertaining fight as well. Looking at, so that card that was in July for Chicago UFC and Fox, as I mentioned, was supposed to have a co-main event of Glover Teixeira and Rumble Johnson. That's now going to be the co-main event of 202. Doesn't look as though they're really going to replace that fight. It looks as though they already had a good fight on the main card in Edson Barboza against Gilbert Melendez. I imagine that will probably serve as the co-main event to Holm and Shevchenko. Also, Felice Herrig and Kaylin Curran is on that card. Francois Ngannou against Boran Mihaljic could possibly get on the main card. Also, hometown guy Eddie Wineland against Frankie Saenz could end up there. Another hometown guy, Darren Elkins, against Pepe could happen. There's a couple things they could go with to fill out that main card. Also, I think it's going to be a solid fight. James Munsari against Alex Oliveira, a.k.a. the Brazilian Cowboy. That should be exciting as well. And also, just to let fans know, if you haven't seen already on my Twitter page, UFC 203, I will be live in attendance there in Cleveland, Ohio, at the Quicken Loans Arena to see Stipe Miocic take on Alistair Overeem. Some matchup has been announced for that, as Ben Rothwell will take on Fabricio Verdum. Huge fight. Could potentially serve as a number one contender. We'll see. Obviously, Cain Velasquez takes on Travis Brown at UFC 200. That may have something to do with the heavyweight title picture as well, depending on how Stipe and Overeem plays out. Also, Nick Lenz, despite constant rumors that he was trying to take on BJ Penn or vice versa, he will be taking on Marbek Tazimov here in the lightweight division. Also added CM Punk, finally. His return, I guess not return, but I guess debut to the UFC will take place here at UFC 203, and he takes on Mickey Gall, 2-0 in his career, but 1-0 in the UFC. Mickey Gall, of course, was featured on the Looking for the Fight web series with Dana White, Nick the Tooth, and former UFC champion Mont Serra. So it should be interesting. That adds a certain level of, I guess, mystique to it, because CM Punk has been training for, by the time the fight happens, I think a little over 18 months, close to 2 years since announcing he was going to fight in the UFC, or sign a contract with the UFC, more apt. And we get to see what he's all about, see if he's any good or if he's really bad. A lot of unknowns, and I'm not sure where his placement on the card will be. I'm assuming it will be on the main card, but where, I'm not 100% certain. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Beyond the Cage. I am your host, Jim Graham, and joining me on the line today, we have a special guest. He is fresh off his victory at Bellator Kickboxing 2 over Stefano Bruno. He is the real deal, Raymond Daniels. And Raymond, thanks for joining me here on Beyond the Cage.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Let's get to your fight there at Bellator Kickboxing 2 against Stefan Bruno. And much like your first fight in Bellator, you were able to win with another spinning back kick to the liver of your opponent. And is that pretty much the way you drew it up there, Raymond?
Yeah, I think a lot of the fighters have seen, when they do a lot of research on me and stuff like that, they've seen me throwing a lot of my flashy kicks and catching people in the head with them. So they're kind of a little bit, paranoid about, me throwing those kicks. So I find that they're leaving their bodies wide open for me. And, So I take advantage of that opportunity. You know, I'm not necessarily a headhunter. I prefer to throw it to the head, but it works just as good throwing it to the body. It's actually one of my stronger techniques that I can actually throw with someone too as well.
Now, of course, after you landed that back kick there to Bruno, the referee kind of was a little hesitant there to step in. You were getting ready to unleash a tornado kick towards his head, but you were able to hold yourself there. Was it harder to keep that kick in and not extend the leg than it is to actually complete that kick, or was that easy for you?
It is. Yeah, no, it's a little more complicated always to pull things back and to throw them with more control. And I actually saw the ref stepping in, and I actually felt like I would have took the ref out because he jumped in between. But that's part of as far as like the martial art discipline, practicing our techniques and strengthening our legs and our body and everything to be able to actually control the different things that we throw. So, you know, people see the fear side of the martial arts, but you know, being able to actually control your techniques and not be able to hurt your opponent or hurt, you know what I mean, is a big part, a big side of it as well. So I take pride in being able to control my techniques, even with my sparring partners, being able to throw the same moves that I throw in my full contact fights, but being able to throw them and being able to pull them and being able to use them with control gives me that much more control of the technique, and it's that much more devastating.
Now, when the referee was stepping in, did you think he was going to do a standing 8 count, or were you expecting the fight to end when it did?
Well, they actually explained to us during the rules meeting that they didn't do standing 8 counts. However, when a fighter, you know, when I was in there in the actual moment, you know what I mean, I didn't know what was going on. I was, you know what I mean, everything's happening. You got so much adrenaline going on. So I didn't understand what the ref was, you know, why the ref stopped it. And then as I started flashing back on it, I realized he actually turned his back away from me. And if you're not in a position where you can protect yourself, that's what the referee's job is for. You know, so therefore he, you know, protects that fighter. Even though we're in there fighting, we're in there competing and engaging against each other, you know, your goal is never to hurt anyone, you know, for any type of like long periods of time or anything like that. You never wish any ill will, fate against your opponent. So the referee did his job and protected him, because when you turn your back, you know, you can take shots like to the back of the head and different things like that. And that's very dangerous. So even when the ref stepped in between, he still took a few steps to run off and still bent over, where he wasn't able to continue. Now, if he would have taken a knee, then I wouldn't have been allowed to hit him, and he could have got an 8 count, you know. But unfortunately, he didn't do that, so therefore the fight had to be stopped.
Now, looking at this event as a whole, obviously it was Dynamite 2 in conjunction with Bellator Kickboxing 2. And have you been a part of something like that before? A huge event where it was like kickboxing, MMA, and like a stadium like that before? Is that completely new to you?
That was a newer one as far as it happening at the same time. We did a show in Italy with the Bellator Kickboxing one, the inaugural event, but they had the kickboxing and then they had the MMA after, so it was technically like two separate events in itself. You know, but having them going one back and forth to the other like that, it was like a really awesome experience. It was great to see, and giving the fans what it is that they want to see as well, all sides of the world.
Now, what did you think about the MMA portion of the card between like Rampage Jackson, Michael Chandler's knockout, and Matt Mitrione's comeback?
I thought it was awesome. I mean, those are some great athletes, some great fighters. You know what I mean? That people love and really enjoy seeing. I think that's what makes the show even that much more devastating. Is you have the MMA aspect where the fights are awesome, they're high energy, high octane, and then you have the kickboxing. You know, with myself, with Kevin Ross, Joe Schilling, Kerry Ann Melendez. You know, so they have a lot of different flavors for the audience. So it's like kind of whatever your taste is. What do you like? Do you like somebody that goes, you know, all in? Do you like a technician? Do you like somebody that's a little bit flashy? You know, they're giving them everything, all types of knockouts and submissions. You know, it's everything the fan wants to see, they could dream of seeing in one night.
Now, I wanted to touch on the MMA main event just for a second. Quentin Rampage Jackson against Ishii. Just kind of watching over that fight and what just what you know of being around martial arts for so long. What did you think about the fight, and do you think the judges scored that one correctly?
I'm obviously not a judge myself, so it's hard to tell what a judge saw, what they did, and what they didn't see. Um, but it really boils down to styles, you know, whose style was stronger, whose style dominated this and dominated that. I think it really boils down to um, how the judges are scoring. You know, if I kind of like lay on you to kind of take you down and just kind of hold you down, does that necessarily mean I'm winning the fight? It's like if you're kickboxing, I stand up and we're not really hitting each other, but I'm holding you the entire time. Does that mean I'm winning the fight because I'm holding you and walking you around the ring and hitting you with insignificant like knees that don't really cause any damage? So it just depends on how each judge is looking at the fight and what they feel is actually doing damage to the other person. If I'm controlling you, and I'm throwing a lot of things, but I'm not really causing any type of damage, um, you know, if I hit you 20 times, but you hit me one time with a really hard shot, which one adds up better for you? You know, was it the 20 shots? Am I winning because I hit you 20 times? Or are you winning because you hit me that one time and it was a really hard shot, which helps you control the fight? So it's hard to understand what it is the judges. That's why when I go out and fight, I always do my best to never leave it in the judges' hands. If I'm standing up at the end and my opponent's laying down on the ground, obviously that means I win.
All right, let's get to the kickboxing portion of the card. I definitely want to get your thoughts on the Joe Schilling and Cato rematch that this time happened in the kickboxing arena. And did that kind of shock you? I guess, first of all, with Joe being so aggressive, that's not typically how he comes out. And two, with the spinning back fist that Cato landed to eventually win the fight.
Yeah, to be honest, I think Joe is a great kickboxer. He's strong. He's got a lot of power. He's got a lot of energy. But sometimes you let your own, I think he let his own ego kind of, of wanting redemption cloud his better judgment, because um, technique for technique, pound for pound, he can beat him. But because he went and turned it into a street fight, into like a brawl, you know what I mean? Where there isn't really a sport where you go 100% all out, except for maybe 100-meter sprint. Even in the 200, you're pacing before you explode, to the end. He came out going 100% from the sound of round one, which consequently tired him out, which made him more susceptible to shots. When if he would have just stepped back and been the technician that he is, and he would have been, a lot more dominant. And I think that was just his own, as far as it's not necessarily ego, just his own sense of pride, getting in the way that I need to go and knock this man out because of what happened last time. Instead of going out and picking him apart and getting the W for one, and then letting the knockout happen. Like when you knock a person out, you're not necessarily like, this is the knockout shot, this is the knockout shot before you actually throw it. You just throw it, and it happens to have land clean, and it's a knockout shot. But he was trying to throw every shot as a knockout shot with 100% of his energy, and that's what I think ended up being his downfall, because he was trying to go out and trying to prove a point to everyone, and when he should have just went out and fought his fight, and he would have dominated the entire fight.
Sticking with Joe Schilling for just a minute, before the fight that he had against Cato, Joe Schilling had a lot of not so nice words for Glory, and of course the former promotion he fought with, and of course you fought for Glory as well. And basically, it didn't sound like he left Glory on good terms and whatnot. And I was wondering, as a person who's fought for Glory yourself, and also now with Bellator, much like Schilling, do you share any sentiments with Joe and wish any ill will towards the people at Glory?
No, I never wish any ill will towards anyone or anything like that. I mean, obviously, it's business. And sometimes in business, people have different viewpoints and different opinions about things and about where they feel that the league should go, how a fighter should act, or how a fighter should be, or how they want to promote their business. So for me, it's each his own. I'm very, happy and fortunate and blessed to be able to work with Bellator, Spike TV, and to wear that banner with Glory. It was definitely a different experience. But I harbor no ill will towards them. I wish their league the best of success. I don't think it will do as well as what Bellator is going to do, just because Bellator has the know-how, and I think that's what Glory was missing. They have they tried to get too big of a roster, I think, and a lot of people in places where they're unsure of. That's why they're doing always so much reconstructing of the actual inner parts, the working parts of it, with different, managers, different, fight promoters, different people that are heading the organization. So I think they're just missing that leadership, so to speak. And I think that's what kind of hurts them, and that's why they lose certain fighters and things of that nature.
So is it safe to say that we won't see you return to Glory anytime soon?
Oh, yeah, you definitely, I'm not one to talk about any of the issues of the reason why I left there, but there will be at no point in my career will I ever fight for them again. And that's just, sometimes things aren't handled the way they should be, and some things can be a little bit more offensive because of the way that they're handled. And for me, there were some different issues that I don't want to go into detail about that were handled in an unprofessional way. And so, therefore, even if they were the only league, I just wouldn't fight kickboxing again if they were the only league that I had to fight for, just because it rubbed me the wrong way. And like I said, again, I wish no ill will for them. I just, at the end of the day, it boils down to respect and how you respect other people and how you carry yourself, inside and outside the ring as a professional. I always showed up as a professional. I made my weight. I fought my heart out. And I think the company should always be held accountable in that same fashion. And I don't think that that they handled themselves that way. And they had multiple opportunities to rectify situations, and yet they just kept lagging on it. In fact, I'm still dealing with a couple of issues that they didn't take care of from when I was under contract with them. So at the end of the day, I'm happy with where I am, and like I said, all I can do is wish them the best of luck. I'm super excited to be a part of Bellator and Spike.
Speaking of Bellator, again, this is now your second consecutive victory with the organization, both first-round knockouts. Of course, when you fought first for Bellator in kickboxing, they had a welterweight title fight, which Kareem Gaji was able to win. Is that what's probably next for you, a title match against Kareem Gaji?
I mean, Kareem Gaji is a very well-experienced fighter. I remember first seeing him actually in fighting in Glory. And I kind of always knew that I'm going to eventually have to fight this guy right here. I'm eventually going to cross paths. So that is something that I have in the horizon. I've been talking to my camp and stuff like that. So, I mean, if it's something that happens, it does. I don't necessarily need it right now and right this second. Obviously, as an athlete and as a fighter, that is always your ultimate goal of winning that title and that championship. But I have a few different things that I'm working on and pushing towards it. It's not only just improving my game inside the ring and getting more comfortable inside the ring, because a lot of the guys have a lot more fighting experience than I do in the ring. I think even Kareem almost has 100 fights or whatever the case is. So I am definitely looking forward to having the opportunity to fight him. But at the same time, my goal is to continue to do what it is that I'm doing, go out and put on a show. And if it happens to have to be against him, then I'll go out and continue to do what I do. But just continue also to build that fan base for Bellator kickboxing, because I know that that's what the sport needs as well. So I never shy away from fighting anyone. So whoever I'm presented with, I'm always willing to step up to the challenge. So I would say maybe about probably 3 fights or 4 fights, I'd get that opportunity to fight Kareem for that title.
If Gaji is not what's next for you, as far as a timetable, I know we're only a few days after your victory, but how quickly do you think you will be back in the Bellator ring?
I'm looking to go as soon as possible. I mean, I'm very fortunate and blessed to be able to do what I love to do for a living. So I kind of live my dream, so to speak. I have a martial arts school, so I'm constantly in practicing. In fact, I'm at my school now where my summer camp's going on. Um, so, I'm looking forward to getting back as soon as they'll give me an opportunity to get back in. I go out with my fights, and I go out, and fighting to me is always like the holidays. It's better to give than to receive. So I always try and give out as much as I can and take the least amount of damage, because the least damage you take is the longer you make your fighting career. You know, um, I definitely don't want to be one of those fighters that fights past my prime, where I'm taking damage and taking injuries and risking my livelihood in order to continue to compete. But as of right now, I'm older. I'm 36, but I feel great. I feel stronger than I ever have. Everything, my body feels amazing. So as soon as they give me the green light, I'm ready to get back in the ring and do it all over again.
Now, of course, in preparation for your fight against Bruno, and also with his preparation for a fight against Stephen Thompson, you went up to Montreal to train with TriStar, Rory McDonald, Faris Zahabi, as well as former UFC champion George Rush St. Pierre. And how long were you there in Montreal, and just how was that experience working with those fellas up there at TriStar?
Oh, that was an amazing experience. I mean, you just named the big three that I really worked with and got to pick their brains a lot. But they had so many different champions up there. It was amazing. Even got a chance to work with TJ Dillashaw as well. So I got a chance to spar with all these elite world class athletes. So it was such a great experience working with Rory for his fight against Stephen Thompson. Stephen's an awesome athlete and stuff like that. Roy defensively was able to check out a lot of Stephen's stuff as far as his offense. He just had a little bit of a difficulty covering the space, and Stephen changed his kind of fighting style and sat back and became more like a sniper, as opposed to like when you saw him fight Hendricks. He was able to go forward and press him a lot more, but he wasn't able to do that with Rory. So it was a great experience to go up there. I mean, Faraz, he has so much knowledge. That man, he's like the Webster Dictionary of martial arts. Of just combat sport. He has so many different ideas and philosophies behind things. But at the same time, what I loved about working with Rory and working with Faraz is they weren't afraid of learning new things, because obviously I come from a karate background, so I have a different style. So their ability to, and their openness to absorb new information was amazing, and it was a great humbling experience for me to be the student, but also be able to be to teacher and to work with them with the different things that I do, and that like he was going to have to see when he fought Steven. They were so open to it and so ready for the information and taking it all in and adapting it immediately. And then George with GSP, oh my goodness, that was amazing in itself. Just to have an opportunity to be able to hang out with him, to work with him. Not only is he like a great champion, I've never seen him turn down a person for like a photo op. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, he gets bothered every time he's walking around, but he always smiles. He's always there for his fans, and I think that's awesome for one, just as a person outside the ring, which people don't get to see all the time. But I mean, he was the first where he was calling me to do sparring with me, you know what I mean, to train with me 1, 2, 3 times a day, making sure I'm getting in rounds. He even came to LA to my school to train with me. So I was there for a week. I came back home. George came out for a little while. I went back out to TriStar again for another week, and I just had an amazing experience and got the chance to spar with world champs for my entire camp. So I went into this particular fight more confident than I probably think I've ever been, because I felt so ready.
Now, of course, there's rumblings about George making his return to the octagon possibly this year, of course, after the layoff and ACL injury he had. Just the training you've done with him, do you think that his return will happen sooner rather than later?
Yeah, I mean, even while I was doing my camp and being in the tip-top shape, I saw George training just like as if he was in a camp. And you know what I mean? Even though he didn't have a particular fight coming up, but still drilling, and his speed and timing are still there. He's able to land a lot of shots on me and put pressure on me and different things like that a lot of times. And especially with the stand-up world, that's more of my world. But his timing and his ability is I mean, he's the true definition of an athlete. You know what I mean? And of a true martial artist. Because he takes all the elements of it and he combines it together, and he understands the philosophy and the discipline that it takes. So even though he's had time off, the man has still trained consistently continued to push himself in his body. Don't get me wrong, when he gets in there, you have a little bit of ring rust, but I think all in all, people will be pleasantly surprised with what he's still capable of doing. And I hope it all goes well. I mean, they're dealing with a few different things, and if everything works out, then he'll be back in there. So I definitely like to see it do it. I know he's got some more years, and he's got some hunger to still do it. And if everything works out as far as the behind-the-scenes side that a lot of people don't get to see, I'm sure he'll look forward to coming back out and getting his title back.
All right, Raymond, I'll get you out of here with this. Of course, as fans of my show know, I'm a huge fan of comic books, and I was wondering, who is your favorite comic book character?
My favorite comic book character would have to be Superman. Superman, because Superman is the only, besides like any type of mutant, he's the only real superhero. He was born as a superhero, and he dresses down to play as a human. His costume is being normal. So he's the truest, for me, superhero, and I enjoy Superman. He's my favorite character, and I love his costume. His costume is being normal when he's a real-life superhero.
All right, he is Raymond Daniels. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at RD_GOAT. And Raymond, thanks again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and look forward to when you turn to the Bellator kickboxing ring later this year.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. I look forward to talking to you again.
Once again, that was Bellator kickboxing standout Raymond the Real Deal Daniels right here on Beyond the Cage. Now let's get back to the events that took place that Raymond Daniels fought at. Bellator Kickboxing 2, also Dynamite 2, or aka Bellator 157, whatever numbers and letters you want to throw out there. But Bellator was in St. Louis, Missouri this past weekend for their kickboxing and MMA dual event. Once again, they did this last year in September at San Jose at the HP Pavilion. Now in St. Louis for this time around. And right off the bat, I got a more comment on the things that took place there. The fact it was that they showed 2 kickboxing matches in between the MMA action, which ended up being 4 fights for MMA. And what was interesting to me was the fact that the kickboxing 2 part, they kind of separated, where Raymond fought Joe Schilling and Gilbert Melendez's wife, Carrie Melendez, is that they kind of made it a separate event. But then if you tuned in for the kickboxing event afterwards, they ended up re-showing the 2 fights that were shown on the Dynamite broadcast, which was the Kevin Ross fight and the Keelholtz fight, were both shown afterwards anyway, as part of like the whole broadcast. And then Joe Schilling, which was kind of the main event of Kickboxing 2, was the first fight shown. I didn't like that order. I understand if you're coming from watching Dynamite and they've been showing the ads that Joe Schilling is fighting, you get to Joe Schilling right away. I get that. But for some people, if that's the only fight they were really interested in, they're going to see the Joe Schilling fight, go, that's cool, and then maybe turn off, think they're done for the evening. So I don't like how they did that split. I don't think it should have been just 2 separate events like that. Dynamite 2 means kickboxing and MMA. Just conduct the whole night as back and forth. Now, if you want to go back afterwards on Dynamite and kind of show all the kickboxing fights kind of uninterrupted into one broadcast, I think that's fine. I think there's no problem with that. And maybe add one fight, the Joe Schilling, but that's kind of not what happened. And I don't know. I didn't like the way it was split up. I feel like that could have been done a little better. And I think the Joe Schilling fight should have been on the main Dynamite broadcast instead of either fight. Take your pick there, because even though I'll get to all the Matts in this, but Keelholz is a very talented kickboxer, one of the best female kickboxers out there, but you're kind of catering, at least for this one, for your American audience, and they're not going to care as much about that fight with Keelholz being Dutch, as opposed to perhaps the Kevin Ross fight where you see two Americans, Ross against Justin Houghton, or of course Joe Schilling, who a lot of people like, is a Bellator fan favorite. Arguably, you could make a case, the face of American kickboxing, and against Cato, who has had some spectacular fights under the MMA banner. So, to me, I think that would be a fight you would have on the Dynamite portion of the card, and then maybe have some of the other fights later on, especially since you weren't having any sort of title fight or anything like that. But that's the way they chose it. Maybe things will change for the next up. I just thought maybe it was a little confusing for all involved that it was kind of two events in one instead of just one event, and I think that would make it simpler for people to know. But that is just my thoughts there. Looking at what actually took place inside the cage and the kickboxing ring, starting first, we'll do kickboxing first in its entirety. Of course, as I mentioned, there was the fight there with Keelholz, and she took on Petroni, if I said that correctly. I think I said that wrong. But looking at that fight there, Gloria Pratori, okay. Gloria Pratori against Denise Keelholz definitely was a very interesting fight. I thought the first round was close. Gloria really was taking it to Keelholz, in my opinion. Was really upping the output, was throwing a lot of different strikes her way. Towards the end, though, I thought Keelholz was starting to kind of figure out. She took a lot of those punches. She was able to block a lot of them. And really towards the end, she landed a couple of very nice low kicks. And in my opinion, I thought I saw Gloria kind of shell up a little bit. You could see that leg being red, and you could tell that maybe in conditioning, getting kicked like that, I think really affected her. And then I thought in round two, Keelholz really took over, was able to capitalize, saw more of those low kicks. And in round three, maybe went away with those a little bit. Maybe Gloria caught her second wind. Round three was close, but I feel like Keelholz came back, took rounds 2 and 3, probably give Gloria round 1. However, when the judge's decision came down, it ended up going split with 2 of the judges seeing it the way for Gloria, and Keelholz loses a fight for the first time in a very long time. And kind of going off what my friends at liverkick.com had to say, not a great decision, but not a total robbery either. That's what happens in close fights, especially 3-round fights. And you got to credit Gloria. I think the judges were maybe looking at more of that pressure she was putting on, because she was moving forward a lot and throwing, and maybe that somehow compensated with Keelholz's calm demeanor, maybe not really getting too amped, kind of just throwing steady combinations that, to me, were doing more damage. But judges went the way for Gloria Pratori in that matchup, but I'm sure Keelholz will be back. Also, on the Dynamite portion of the card, as I mentioned, Kevin Ross against Justin Houghton, and I sent a tweet out of this while I was watching. Justin Houghton, I actually saw fight for Bellator in MMA back at Bellator 82, which was in November of 2012. And I think he only fought one more time in mixed martial arts after that. And I didn't know he was doing kickboxing. He is a Michigan native, so it was cool to see him back with Bellator. Crazy to see it in a kickboxing ring against the guy, again, the caliber of Kevin Ross. And Houghton tried. He was a tough kid. He hung in there, but he's just right now not at the level of Kevin Ross, who's been doing this for so many years. And I think Ross is adjusting very nicely to the rules. I know that was kind of a concern when they first brought him to Bellator Kickboxing when he debuted at Bellator Kickboxing 1. But I think he's a nice fit for this organization. I think he's a good, solid kickboxer. And again, trying to bring in good American kickboxers, I think, will help draw in casual viewers here in the United States. So I think it's important that they're able to find guys like Kevin Ross, who's not only good but brings a wealth of experience and has that Muay Thai background. So definitely can throw some very dangerous strikes. Now that was the Dynamite portion of the card. Looking at the 3 fights that were under the kickboxing banner, of course, I'll skip the Schilling fight for just a minute. We just talked to Raymond Daniels about his win over Stefano Bruno, and once again another first-round knockout for the real deal via spinning back kick. And in my opinion, and I asked him this question, I think Karim Gaji is next for Bellator's so far only kickboxing championship. I just think that's the matchup to make. I mean, I'm not really sure how many more guys, how many more Italian guys Bellator can feed him. If you look at his record, both fights so far under the Bellator banner, Raymond Daniels has fought an Italian, and he's knocked him out with spinning back kicks to the liver and knocked him out in the first round. So I think it's about time we see Raymond Daniels take a step up in competition, and it should be interesting. I think a fight against Karim Gaji would be highly entertaining. I think would be a great main event for possibly Bellator Kickboxing 3. If they're going to plan on doing an event every couple of months, their first one was in April, now in June. I mean, he only fought for 1:45. You got to believe he'd be good to go for a kickboxing event in August. And heck, he probably even would be ready for one this weekend if they had one this weekend. So we're looking forward to that coming up next. But yeah, just Bruno. Yeah, I asked him this question, but I would have liked to see maybe a standing 8 count, but I'm not. Some people were up in arms about the stoppage there by the referee, but I didn't think it was that big a deal. Looking at the Kerry Melendez fight against Sarah Howell was making her pro debut in kickboxing. Melendez has been training and has been around her husband training for mixed martial arts for many years, and to me, this was just kind of a layup for Kerry Melendez to try to build her up as a kickboxer and potential mixed martial artist with Bellator as well. And no offense to Sarah Howell, I mean, she hung tough, but there was really going to be short of like a crazy kick or fist, kind of like what Cato did to Joe Schilling, get there just a second. That was about the only way she was going to win. She was just not going to beat Kerry Melendez, and it was just remind me of the last time they had Dynamite, where again Kerry Melendez fought and once again dominated her opponent. So Kerry Melendez did what she was supposed to do and get a dominant victory. The main event, and what ended up being the first fight of the night, Joe Schilling against Hisaki Kato for the second time, this time in the kickboxing arena. And Joe Schilling, boy, I've seen a lot of Joe Schilling's fights going back to Glory, and I don't know if I've seen Joe Schilling have that much output before and really try to put it on somebody like that. He's a lot more fluid with his moments in terms of where he's placing his kicks and his punches. You know, his hands are a little wider. You know, he comes from a Muay Thai background, and he kind of, not necessarily counters, but he does picks. He's usually a little more selective. He's usually more apt to throw 1 or 2 hard shots as opposed to a barrage of punches and really try to knock you out with one solid shot. And in this fight, we kind of saw the complete opposite. I mean, we saw a just blitz of strikes from Joe Schilling. And Cato in the first round, at least for kind of, I'd say, the first half to 2 minutes, was doing a good job holding up. He landed some counters of his own, did catch Joe a couple times, but Joe was coming forward and coming forward. Round 2, you could see Cato starting to wear down. He was not able to keep up the pace with Joe Schilling. He's not used to getting kicked and punched so many times, of course, coming mainly from a mixed martial arts background. So he was not used to this constant stand-up where he couldn't take it to the ground to try to avoid said strikes. And I think Cato towards then, it was looking like he was about to go down, just decided to throw a spinning back fist and see what happens. And Joe Schilling, because he was so aggressive the whole night, his hands weren't necessarily around his head, got caught once again by a crazy technique, much like the first fight where he got caught with the Superman punch, now with the spinning back fist, and Schilling was out cold. You could tell he tried to come up, and he wanted to come up, but couldn't, and Big John McCarthy had to wave this one off for Cato, once again defeating Joe Schilling. And I think unlike the first one, which happened kind of quickly and kind of suddenly, this one, for Joe Schilling, obviously disappointing, but this one was a little more fluky to me, and I think Cato kind of admit that Joe Schilling is the better kickboxer. He's going to return to MMA. He doesn't have plans on doing kickboxing, and he kind of said, yeah, he's putting it on me, and I threw that and landed. And that's pretty much what happened. Crazy output by Joe Schilling, but that's just how the fight game goes sometimes. You only need one punch, and obviously Cato's a guy that, whether it's kickboxing or MMA, that's all he needs to win a fight. And props to Cato. I mean, he could have just stood there and took it, went into the third round, and maybe tried to hang on more, but sometimes when you're losing a fight, you just kind of say, what the heck, I'll throw a back fist. What's the worst thing that could happen? I mean, he's already tagging me, and it landed right on the button. So, you know, speaking of all the comments that Schilling had about Glory and saying, you know, that they're a bad promotion and nobody should talk about him and he didn't like his time there and everything, may have turned out well for Glory. I'm not saying Joe Schilling can't rebound from this loss, but letting him go after losing the Jason Wilness fight, he wasn't coming into this fight with the biggest of momentum. Now he loses once again to Cato in what was perceived his world, the kickboxing world, and he did it on such a big stage there, you know, right after the Rampage Jackson fight. You know, maybe it kind of works out good for Glory. I don't know. We'll see how Schilling rebounds, but it definitely, Bellator kind of takes a hit in getting the exclusive rights to stitch him up. So maybe everything will work out good for Glory here. Speaking of Glory, I want to transition to Glory 31 before I get to the MMA portion of Bellator 157, aka Dynamite 2, whatever you want to talk about there. And Glory 31 Amsterdam happened this past weekend, of course, shown on UFC Fight Pass as well as ESPN3.com. Undercard, pretty exciting. Dannenberg, boy, that dude is just super tall here in this welterweight division. I think he's like 6'2 or 6'3. He's going to be a force to be reckoned with, and he's super young too. Suarez is a very good boxer, very entertaining, likes to really push the pressure, push the pace. Had an awesome fight with the Gregorian, and just he could not deal with that reach of Dannenberg. That's going to be a problem for a lot of people in this division. And if he can add a little power to it, a little threat to that, he could go a long way here in Glory. Josh Johnsey against Moziev. Boy, Anatoly, I thought kind of an upset here against Josh Johnsey. I thought this was Johnsey's fight. I thought Johnsey had a very good first round. But then Moziev, who I think you can make a case has the more power, I think was starting to figure out the rhythm of Johnsey, was starting able to land, really starting to bloody up the nose of the Canadian. And I think that may have kind of threw Johnsey off his game. Anytime you get blood or cut or perhaps a broken nose, it definitely affects your breathing, can affect what you're trying to do out there. And Moziev ends up, to me, in my opinion, taking the final 2 rounds, and the judges agreed by taking this fight. A big win for Moziev in the lightweight division. Speaking of controversial female fight decision, Bellator had one, and so did Glory, as Isis Verbeek took on Mazepa, and despite the lack of experience that Irina Mazepa brought into this fight against the Dutch woman Verbeek, I thought had a great fight. The first round I definitely thought was Verbeek. I thought she was landing the better combinations, landing more frequently, also throwing more. Mazepa was able to land a very nice spinning back kick in round number 2 that I think just completely drained Verbeek. And from that point, you could see her try to recover, but she never really, to me, fully got back into that form we saw in the first round. And in my opinion, I would have gave the Russian rounds 2 and 3 However, two of the judges did see it the way of Isis, and that really surprised me. I don't know if it was maybe a little more of the output, but Irina, to me, was landing the heavier strikes and landed, to me, the most significant strike in the fight with that spinning kick to the head. And I hope she sticks around in glory. They mentioned that she also is doing mixed martial arts as well, but she got robbed, in my opinion. And if one of these other girls in this tournament injures out, I hope that she gets the call to replace them, because to me, she should be in the semifinal round and not Verbeek. Senchai, the Muay Thai legend, about 400 professional fights, made his glory and overall traditional kickboxing debut against Eddie Nayat Soleimani. Soleimani, very impressive in his own right, coming into the fight with a record of 60-1 at just 22 years old. Unfortunately for Eddie, I'm not sure if he was ready for the speed of Senchai, who has fought at several different weight classes in his career. At one time was holding 4 titles simultaneously, and I think that was the key factor to me, was the speed of Senchai and his ability with his feet, not just hand speed, his ability with his feet to get in and out of the pocket and not allow Soleimani to hit him with some powerful shots, being the bigger guy, the taller guy, and the stronger guy. And Senchai, to me, just had a master performance. He knew when to be in, when to be out, didn't really take much damage, and to me was able to land more damage to the Frenchman, and to me make it a really strong debut. This was in the featherweight weight class, which is obviously right now the lowest class Glory has, so he's going to be taking on bigger guys throughout his tenure here in Glory. But even at 35 years old and all the fights and all the wars that he's been in, if he can still move like that, he can have a chance in this division. And I think this division might need some names. Now, they mention Robin van Roosmalen potentially moving down to face Sergey Adamchuk, of course, who has a title defense coming up. But we'll get to the Robin here in a minute. I think Robin, at least for one more fight, stays at 154. But I think Senchai would be a great matchup, possibly even next, to fight for the featherweight championship. Now, I think a featherweight tournament with him part of it for a potential Glory main card, I think may be the next step. But in my opinion, I think you could give him Adamchuk or whoever comes out of that matchup coming up in Virginia next month, Senchai. I think that would be a tremendous matchup, and I think that would be a very easy sell for Glory. Headlining the Super Fight Series, Zach Muikasa, former light heavyweight title challenger, got his chance once again for the title, albeit an interim, as he took on Bouzidi. And as Makwesa often does, he made quick work of his opponent, knocking out Bouzidi in the first round. And I don't know if Bouzidi know what hit him. I mean, Makwesa was, or Muikasa rather, was over him, all over him, from the start to the finish to become the interim light heavyweight champion. And he just looked fantastic. I know that Vahitov is out there. I think that is an eventual matchup. Bouzidi was actually ahead of Muikasa in the rankings, but boy, it didn't look like it after the result of this fight. Now, Gohan Saki is also ranked at number 2. He is a guy that can factor in possibly for a title defense. Of course, we have former champion Saulo Calvari. Hasn't fought since losing the light heavyweight title. That could be a potential fight for Muikasa. Of course, Calvari is his only 2 losses in Glory, so that would be a great trilogy fight, and of course a chance for some revenge for Zach. We'll see what happens. I don't know how long Vahitov will be off, if that will be a potential next fight for Zach, but either way, some people were controversial of the decision. I saw some people on the message boards, the R kickboxing community on Reddit, were saying, how come Vahitov gets hurt and has to have an interim champion encroach upon him when Rico Verhoeven wants to do an MMA match, essentially taking time away from Glory. And the guy who earned his shot, Ismail Lant, who was in the co-main event of this card, we'll get to in just a second, doesn't fight for an interim title, has to take another fight. I think in the case of Ismail Lant, he was guaranteed a shot at the title and will get that. And the only thing, it looks bad, obviously, if Lant lost his fight and then fights Verhoeven coming off a loss. That does look bad. That's a tough sell for Glory, but that's a risk, obviously, Glory and Lant was willing to take with Verhoeven wanting to do another MMA bout. So I kind of get why that wasn't there for Lant in an interim title shot. Also add in the fact that Verhoeven's been unstoppable. He has defended his title successfully every time. He's done it without controversy, and he's only lost once overall in Glory in 12 fights. So he's been with the promotion a lot longer, whereas Vahitov just became the champion. So with getting hurt, he may be out a lot longer than it will take for Verhoeven to train for an MMA fight, complete it, and be able to return to the kickboxing ring. So I think that's why they went ahead with the interim title for the light heavyweight division, because the way Muikasa fights, and again, he proved it there in Amsterdam, he fights quickly and can easily fight again very soon, and that may be before the current champion is ready to go. Looking at the main card of Glory 31, talking about the welterweight tournament, Myrtle Groenhart and Yohan Congolo were the two that made it to the final. As I thought, Groenhart was going to be way too much for Benson Moore, who just, he's good, but he's not the level of Myrtle Groenhart. Groenhart really put it to him in that first round. I thought the second round maybe faded a little bit. He caught his breath there in the third, landed some very good knees, kept on pushing to finally, as he got several knockdowns there on Benson Moore, was able to get the win. Congolo against Gregorian, great fight. I thought Gregorian early was the aggressor. He was landing a lot more of the combinations, but I think kind of wore himself out and maybe was worrying too much about trying to put Congolo away early. But I don't think Congolo is really a guy that you can put away early. I mean, he fought Nicky Holtzkin to a 5-round decision and looked really good against the champion. So I think Gregorian maybe went in with a little bit of the wrong strategy there, and Congolo, to me, was able to come back, land the better combinations in round 2 and 3, and obviously was the fresher guy heading into those final 2 rounds as he was able to get by Gregorian. Looking at the final, once again, a close fight. I thought Groenhart had the first. Congolo, again, Groenhart kind of faded in the second, but then in round 3, it really started with the end of round 2, that huge left knee that Groenhart was able to land on Congolo. And in round 3, Congolo could not really recover. Kind of reminded me of Isis Verbeek earlier on in the evening. Couldn't really recover from that knee. Groenhart kept on coming forward. Congolo tried his best, but it ended up being a unanimous decision win there for Myrtle Groenhart. And solid fight, a fight I'd love to see again at some point. Again, these two are training partners, but they did mention some animosity with obviously both trying to compete for a Glory title, training at Mike's gym there in the Netherlands. So maybe Groenhart kind of saw it as a little bit of disrespect that his gym would take on another fellow welterweight contender. Great fight. I hope we see that Myrtle again and see the Myrtle we fought Nicky Holtzkin, because he can't fight like he did against, I believe it was Doumbé. So as long as we don't see that Groenhart, we're going to see an exciting title rematch between Holtzkin and Groenhart. As I mentioned, the aforementioned Ismail Lant took on Eddie Georges, and boy, the close fight. Eddie definitely had Hedzi, not Eddie, Hedzi, incredible first round by him. Definitely was just all over Ismail Lant. I think did come close to finishing the Dutchman, but Lant stayed strong, was able to survive the storm, and able to recover and come back and really put it on Hedzi, who I think, especially in that third round, really faded, I think, from trying to finish Lant when he wasn't able to do that. I think it took a toll on him conditioning-wise, and Lant, I think, proved over 6 rounds that, yeah, he may look tired, but he's still going to be throwing. He's not going to let that stop him from throwing combinations, and kept at it and kept at it. Had Hedzi hurt, I think, in that third round, Didn't finish him, but I think definitely deserved the victory. The second round was close, but I definitely would have gave the final 2 rounds for Lant. He gets the victory, and for glory's sake, hopefully, if he doesn't have to take another fight, I think that's the best case scenario, doesn't go into a matchup with Rico Verhoeven coming off a loss. Main event of the evening, a rematch between Robin van Roosmalen against Sitthichai Sitsongpyeong. And this one, another close fight, another good fight. I think a little better than the first one. And this time around, however, the man from Thailand, the first champion from Asia in glory, Sitsongpyeong, was able to do what he wasn't in the first matchup, and that's win the Glory Lightweight Championship. This one is interesting because I thought Sitthichai won the first matchup, and I thought won it 3 or 4 rounds to 1. I thought Van Roosmalen wasn't really able to stop that rear left leg kick and the left knee as well. And in this matchup, we saw Sitthichai really up the output with his boxing. He's actually doesn't really throw as many punches as he does kicks and knees, but in the first couple rounds, really saw him up his boxing, and I think that took Robin off a little bit. I don't think he was expecting more boxing output from Sitthichai, and because of that, I think that maybe wore Sitthichai a little bit out, and I think that played more into Robin, and I would have gave Sitthichai round 1 and round 4. That's how I had it. And then rounds 2, 3, and 5, I would have gave Robin. And this was a close fight. I definitely could see how it went either way. I mean, you change one of those rounds for Sitthichai, he obviously is the champion, and that's what happened there. I just find it interesting because I thought Sitthichai won the first one, lost. I thought Robin won this one, lost. So I guess they got it right in a backwards way, that it should be one apiece. We find ourselves with Sitthichai being the champion. I hope this time around, like Sitthichai had to go through a tournament again to get the title shot. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope Robin just gets the rematch and we see an incredible trilogy fight, because I think that has to happen. I think an immediate rematch should have happened the first time around. I don't know if Van Roosmalen wants to fight Sitthichai basically for a 3rd time in a row. Maybe he wants to fight a different opponent. Again, there was talks of him fighting down a weight class. So I'm not sure exactly what's next, but a trilogy to me has to be somewhere in the forecast for either late 2016 or the first half of 2017. I think we have to see it. I don't think I'm going on a limb to say most fans of Glory want to see this rematch. And as far as I know, it'll be like the first major trilogy to me, especially when a title is involved in Glory. And maybe other than the Simon Marcus Art of 11, of course that was the 3rd at Glory 27. However, there's a draw in there, so this will be a true rubber match to me between Robin and Sitthichai, and hopefully we get that sooner rather than later. To end the show, I'm going to recap the MMA portion of Bellator 157. As most know, Dynamite 2. 4 fights happened on the main portion of the card for Dynamite 2. Matt Mitrione was the first person to step into the cage for Bellator for their really the main portion of the card. But the first overall fight was Rebecca Ruth against McFarlane. That was in the women's flyweight division. And this was a very interesting fight because Ruth was coming in with a lot of momentum stemming from her last fight in Bellator where she was able to win. Of course, Ruth was not only had a lot of momentum, she was the hometown girl fighting there out of Missouri in St. Louis against Eliomale McFarlane. And despite being what appeared to be the bigger and stronger fighter in Ruth, McFarlane took it right to her with the grappling. She was not shying away from that aspect of the game at all, which I thought was going to play right into Ruth's wheelhouse. And McFarlane did not back down one bit, just kept on pushing the pace with the takedown, kept on trying for it, had very close in the first round to finishing Ruth. She went back at it the second, kept going, and eventually did get the submission despite the vigorous efforts by Ruth to fight it off, and finally went down. And just incredible performance by McFarland. Took the momentum and steam and prestige right out of Rebecca Ruth, and I thought that was just very impressive for a girl no one's ever heard of before, and just incredible. I think big things are here for her. Of course, Bellator is planning on sticking with a women's flyweight division as well as a female featherweight division. So I think her against Yanakova could be a very interesting fight. I don't know if that's what's next for her, but I think that would be a very good fight, and I think you can make a case it could be for Bellator's flyweight championship. So, of course, they have a potential featherweight fight happening soon for their, and I guess it would be inaugural because their only champion, Zola Frost, I believe, was at 115 strawweight. So, anyways, looking at Matt Mitrione, as he took on Carl Samunfatu. Samuntafa? I don't know. Anyways, he took on Carl. So I kind of skipped over that. Now back to it. Boy, he got nailed with a huge right hand against Carl. Came very close to getting finished. I think Carl, I don't want to say he messed up horribly, but I think he could have done things differently and could have got a first round finish of his own. I think he was trying too much to grapple and set up punches and looked like a possible submission instead of either letting Mitrione try to get back up or kind of stay more passive from the outside, kind of in an up-down sort of position and try to punch that way. And I think maybe not expecting to drop Mitrione that early, maybe surprise Carl. Maybe he wasn't quite sure what to do. He does have over 10 MMA fights, but nobody against the caliber of Matt Mitrione. Of course, on a big, huge stage like that, Dynamite, maybe it got to him. Maybe he kind of locked up a little bit. Mitrione was able to recover, able to clear out the cobwebs, out-grapple Carl, was able to get on top, and then landed a very nice right hand of his own, and Carl was out cold at 322 in the first round. Then Matt Mitrione came back, announced one of the kickboxing matches for Bellator Kickboxing. He's supposed to be the regular color commentator for Bellator Kickboxing, and he just did it for one fight, but that's incredible to me that he fights, gets rocked like that, still goes out there, changes out, dresses up in the nice gray suit he was sporting there, and just for one fight gets on the call, I think is incredible. Then they announced that he already has his next fight. He's going to take on Ollie Thompson. That's going to be next month in July for Bellator's first trip to England. So, boy, it is a quick turnaround here for Matt Mitrione. Went quick turnaround to Bellator Kickboxing, and now all of a sudden, he's taking on Ollie Thompson. And for Carl, he proved that he's got some power, man. And I think that could be a fight maybe in the future we see Mitrione against Carl again, but I hope they keep him around because I think he just got to tweak that little part and he could have won. So props to him. I think that he is he's a good guy for Bellator to have. The co-main events for the MMA portion was Pitbull against Michael Chandler for the now vacant lightweight championship. Of course, Will Brooks, now in the UFC, he will be taking on Ross Pearson coming up at the Ultimate Fighter 23 finale. Vacates the title. I don't think Pitbull should have got the spot. I mean, he won in Italy, sure, at the Bellator MMA event there. But his previous fight, he lost to Derek Anderson again. I believe Held just beat Jansen in a fight coming up. I think Marcin Held could have been a guy that factored in the table. Not to mention Josh Thompson, who was supposed to fight Michael Chandler back in May. Obviously, Derek Anderson beating Pitbull twice. Probably missing some other names in the lightweight division, but I think those maybe would have been more deserving choice. However, they went with Pitbull, the bigger name, and Michael Chandler just landed one of those right hands that he's able to deliver and just knocked out Pitbull cold. I mean, Chandler's had some great knockouts over his Bellator career, but you add in the Dynamite stage for a title, and you add in Pitbull, a rematch, all this stuff, and boy, just incredible performance. And I think Pitbull didn't deserve it, and I hate to ish ill will on anybody, no pun intended there on the Will Brooks reference, but I'm kind of glad he lost because, like I said, I don't think he deserved the shot, and Michael Chandler gets back the lightweight title, and Will Brooks was good for Bellator, I thought. Maybe they didn't promote him the right way. Maybe he didn't quite act the right way. I think both sides have legitimate beef there. They let him go. I think he was destined for bigger and better competition. Michael Chandler, I think, could compete in the UFC level as well. But for Bellator, he's a little flashier. He goes for the finish a little more. And for what Bellator's trying to accomplish, you got to have an edge to you. And I think Michael Chandler has that edge to him. So I see why they did it. And Michael Chandler becomes champion again. And he has no shortage of fights between Ben Henderson, Josh Thompson. I mentioned Derek Anderson. So there's going to be some good fights here coming up in Bellator's lightweight division. The main event of the evening, which was, I think, supposed to be at originally 215, then they changed it, and then I think ended up being like 220 or 225. I don't know. It was rather irrelevant what the weight was. Rampage Jackson taking on Satoshi Ishii, who was actually an Olympic gold medalist in judo in the 2008 games. And the fight wasn't great. I think Rampage up a weight class did not look good to me. Obviously taking on a big dude, to me, a more legitimate heavyweight in Ishii. Ishii in the first round did what I thought he would do. He thought he would push the fight up against the cage, try to work for a takedown, and work for position. Now, I didn't expect the lack of damage from Ishii. I haven't seen too much of him, but I thought, he maybe try a little more considering the power that Rampage Jackson has. Round 2 was close. Ishii did land a takedown and did control, but Rampage started to stay out of the clinch, get off his back, and landed some combinations of his own. So I think the second round was close. I would have gave it to Ishii. I've heard a lot of people saying they would have gave Rampage the second round. Third round was definitely Quentin Rampage Jackson. I don't think there's any debate about that. So it was really kind of how you scored the first round. I think most would have gave Ishii the first. Most would have gave Rampage the third. It's how you scored that second round. And 2 of the judges scored the second round for Rampage Jackson, giving him the split decision, 29-28, 29-28, and 30-27. I think that's maybe more telling than how you scored the second round is the fact that one judge saw every single round for Rampage. And he had in the controversial decision earlier with Keyholtz. Interesting judging calls there in Missouri. But Rampage Jackson gets the win. To me, even if you give Ishii the win, the fact of the matter is it just wasn't a great fight. And to me, they kind of both lose by not delivering. And I think Bellator, who again tries to go for flashier matchups, I don't think this was a great matchup. You're bringing in, first of all, heavyweight to fight a light heavyweight. I think that was strike number 1. 2, you're pinning Rampage Jackson, a known striker, against a guy who's not going to strike with him in Ishii. And this is your big return of Quentin Rampage Jackson. You have this huge production, and with doing it at Dynamite, all of a sudden he had that whole, I think it might have even been an hour-long show on Spike talking about the return of Rampage Jackson to the Bellator cage. And you choose an opponent that nobody knows about, really, that is not very exciting, and is not going to, and probably wasn't going to make it exciting with Rampage, which is almost impossible to do, make a boring Quentin Rampage Jackson fight. And that's what happened. And I think for Bellator, for doing these big freak shows and productions, dropped the ball a little bit. Now, ratings were good for Dynamite overall and good for the kickboxing portion. But that match could have been better. It could have had a little more hype to it, in my opinion. Now, he talked about wanting to fight his friend and also former UFC champion Tito Ortiz. That was a fight that was supposed to happen, I think, a couple years ago. Never got to fruition. So I think that's probably what's next for Rampage. I think that's the fight to make. I wish that was the fight here. There's several light heavyweights that Bellator has on its roster that I think could have made for a more interesting bout. And they didn't do it. They could have brought in even another heavyweight that strikes a lot. I don't know. I think there are guys that they could have easily got to fight Rampage that would have made it a better event. However, that's what went down, and we see Rampage back in the Bellator cage. Once again, I'm your host, Jim Graham. You can follow me on Twitter at Jim Graham. You can also like the show, Beyond the Cage, on Facebook, facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. We are 25 likes away from 500. We're going to give away a whole bunch of photos, signed photos from MMA and kickboxing stars. So go to the page, like it if you haven't already, tell your friends about it, and once we hit 500, we'll start a contest to give away those photos, and the Facebook page has pictures of all those signed photos that will be given away, including Joe Schilling, Dwayne Ludwig, our friend Darren Cruikshank, Rad Martinez, boy, just so many names on that list, Brian Ebersol. So just go over to facebook.com/Beyond the Cage podcast to check it out. Also, if you're watching here on YouTube, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage podcast, please subscribe to our page, like our videos, watch our videos, share our videos, all that good stuff as well. I'd like to thank our friends at MMAFightClub.net, also mainly running the Facebook blog, MMA Fight Club, so like their page today and join the discussion about mixed martial arts and converse with the fellas over there at MMA Fight Club. Again, MMA Fight Club on Facebook, like their page. Friends at MMAforlife.ca, MMAinsider.net. I want to give a shout out to American Icon Autographs. They helped me set up the interview here with Raymond Daniels. And you can search American Icon Autographs online and also on eBay, selling autographs and other good memorabilia from not just the world of mixed martial arts and kickboxing, but as well as the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, pop culture, comic books. Anything you could think of that you would want autograph, American Icon is a great source for that, so please hit them up as well. And let's see, our friends at TopRatedMMA.com also want to give a shout out to Tip a Fighter, Legends of the Cage, and I want to give a shout out, of course, to our friend AJ Hiller running MMA Signatures USA.com, the top place to get MMA signed memorabilia, MMA Signatures USA.com. Again, I am Jim Graham. Thank you to Raymond Daniels for joining me earlier on in the program, and thanks to you watching wherever you may be in the world. So once again, I am Jim Graham, and thanks again for listening to another edition of Beyond the Cage.